There are obviously good and negative sides in the use of this kind of technology. Today we know that the nuclear technology was discovered in 1934 by physicist Enrico Fermi, conducted experiments in Rome that showed neutrons could split in many kinds of atoms. Early in 1942, a group of scientists led by Fermi developed their theories, and at the end of the year they were ready for construction of the world's first nuclear reactor. On 6 August of 1945, the atomic bomb, nicknamed Little Body, is dropped on Hiroshima in Japan, and 3 days later, atomic bomb Fat Man is dropped on Nagasaki, and this ending the World War II. In 1951, Breeder Reactor 1 in the USA produces the first electric power from nuclear energy, lighting 4 light bulbs. World had entered the nuclear age.
Nuclear reactors generate power through nuclear fission, which is a process where uranium atoms are split, and this allows to release energy. It was only in the 50s that the various nations began to increase the use of nuclear energy for the production of electricity. In 1953, the President of the United States announced his Atoms for Peace program at the United Nations General Assembly, aiming to create an international cooperation for using nuclear power as a peaceful source of energy. So the use of nuclear energies was implemented and developed in different countries because the uranium produces a large amount of energy, and in fact the energy released in the fission of 1 gram of uranium corresponds to the amount of energy granted by combusting 3 tons of coal. Other pushing factors were given by the possibility to find substitutes of fossil fuels and produce less greenhouse gases, having a small impact on the environment. After the initial enthusiasm, however, there was a slowdown in the construction projects of the new power plants due to the rising of contrary movements and nuclear disasters.
Analyzing the graph, nuclear reactors generated a total of 2553 terawatt per hour in 2020. Thanks to the discovery of nuclear energy in North America, in the first years of the 70s, there was a consistent development. Secondly, we can notice that Asia has implemented nuclear technology in the production mix, more slowly with respect to Western economies, with low but steady growth, until reaching a level of production similar to that of Europe in 2020. While South America has insignificant production, Eastern Europe and Russia have developed this technology and increased production until the 2000s, maintaining a constant level.
The Chernobyl were the greatest nuclear disaster in the modern history and has greatly influenced public opinion in many countries without implication until now. As is well known, in Italy there was a referendum in 1987 that stopped the national nuclear production programs and the construction of the largest and most technologically advanced nuclear power plant in Europe, that is on Latina. As a consequence of these choices, the production has decreased by 5% and has been replaced by the fossil sources, in particular coal. The result of the 1987 referendum was certainly influenced by the great media and social impact of the disaster that occurred shortly before at Chernobyl. It should be remembered that for a long period of time there was a shortage of vegetables and dairy production throughout Europe due to ag radiation carried by air currents all over Europe.
In the years following the Fukushima accident in 2011, all reactors in Japan were closed down. As more reactors in Japan restart, the decision was made to permanently shut down other reactors. In the other countries, there were different reactions. In Italy, for example, there was another referendum to abrogate every type of nuclear program. As well as Germany decided to end the nuclear production by the 9 plants running in the country. Instead, in the USA, where there are 93 nuclear reactors in 2012, we can notice a peak of production and a capability to produce nuclear energy with 104 plants and a decreasing of number of reactors in the following years, but not due to the Fukushima disaster, but because of a combination of factors, including cheap natural gas, market liberalization, and over-subsidy of renewable sources.
Today, when we think about energy mixes, we think about a diverse range of sources: coal, oil, gas, nuclear, hydropower, solar, wind, biofuels. But if we look back a couple of centuries ago, our energy mixes were relatively homogeneous. Nuclear energy was added to the mix only in 1960s. Let's look at our energy mix today and explore what sources we draw upon. Globally, we get the largest amount of our energy from oil, followed by coal, gas, then hydroelectric power. What about the nuclear energy? It has significantly increased its share in the first decades of its application. However, since 19th, its share in the general energy mix stays relatively stable, while in absolute indicators it has increased from 5,557 terawatt-hours in 1990 to 6,973 in 2019. Thus, the energy mix today is more compounded than ever in mankind's history.
The discovery of this technology has greatly influenced the course of history. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, many countries around the world began to develop this technology to try to keep up with America. During the Cold War, the US and Soviet Union presidents had a direct telephone link to launch nuclear warheads. Thus began a period of tension that lasted for more than 30 years. Now the power of a single atomic bomb has increased by 3000% compared to those of the 40s, and the combination of these weapons could potentially wipe out all of humanity. The most developed economies have these weapons in their arsenal, and many of the diplomatic crises in the Middle East that we are seeing are related to the implementation of these technologies. These weapons underpin the current geopolitical balances and will continue to influence the course of history for decades to come.
In 2020, the list of top nuclear-generated countries included the United States, China, France, Russia, South Korea, and other countries. Talking about the USA, the world's largest nuclear energy producer, the nuclear industry supports nearly 500,000 jobs in the United States and contributes an estimated $60 billion to the US gross domestic product each year. Almost all the US nuclear generating capacity comes from reactors built between 1967 and 1990. The US fleet is operated by 30 different power companies across 30 different states. The world's biggest emitter, China's planning at least 150 new reactors in the next 15 years, more than the rest of the world has built in the past 35 years. The efforts could cost as much as $440 billion. As early as the middle of this decade, the country will surpass the US as the world's largest generator of nuclear power. China has two major nuclear power companies. France derives about 70% of its electricity from nuclear energy due to a long-standing policy based on energy security. France is the world's largest net exporter of electricity due to its very low cost of generation and gains over 3 billion euros per year from this. Électricité de France, EDF, the country's main electricity generation and distribution company, is sustainably owned by the French government with around 85% shares in government hands.
Well, yes. In addition to the production of large amount of electricity with a relatively low amount of waste and a significant reduction of CO2 emissions, there is another aspect to consider, the social one. As shown by a study of Stanford University, a nuclear reactor like GINA present in the state of New York has a great impact on employment, with an average of about 700 people employed directly, another 800 indexed, and almost 1,000 in periodic maintenance. To this first data should be added the fact that GINA is the largest taxpayer in the state, with 80 million in direct taxes paid, but to this must be added the taxes generated by payroll taxes and those arising from the growth of the economy influenced by a lower cost of electricity. A nuclear reactor is therefore an opportunity for the states that install them, and in some ways also a form of long-term investment, considering the average life of a reactor.
In last decades, studies and developments dedicated to the field of nuclear power have been really interesting, pushing towards to the future and advanced technologies. NASA, for example, has blown out that it's trying to reach a requisition for a fission surface power system to the Moon, but eventually even Mars. Fission surface power, in conjunction with solar cells, battery and fuel cells, can provide the power to operate rovers, conduct experiments, and use the Moon's resources to produce water propellant and other supplies for life support. Another curious tool, which requires nuclear energy, is named tokamak. A tokamak is a device which uses a powerful magnetic field to confine plasma in the shape of a torus. The tokamak is one of the several types of magnetic confinement devices being developed to produce controlled thermonuclear fusion power. As of 2021, it is leading the candidate for a practical fusion reactor. Dai.
Fine. Good job.